Cashew and Nut Trading Software with Jeremy Holt.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your humble host. Make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for past episodes and show notes. And I'm excited that lots of people are taking me up for the offer of a complimentary 30-point DevOps inspection for your environment. It's helping out a lot of people. And also, I want to extend that for people who are working remotely for the first time. At my company, we've worked remotely for a long time. We're 100% remote. We've got the formula dialed in. If your company is trying to do development in a distributed environment and this is new for you and you don't have things worked out, give me a call. No strings attached whatsoever. I would love to help you get productive and get moving so that you can move fast and deliver quality while all of the developers on the team are in a different location. And there's formulas for doing that well and collaborating together and tracking the work and as well as managing it. So reach out to me. Absolutely no strings attached. I'd just love to help you out with a conversation there. And if you're tuning in for the first time to the Azure DevOps Podcast, this podcast is for developers shipping software with Microsoft technologies. And my goal is for all development teams to be able to move fast, deliver quality, and run their systems with confidence. Now, today we have Jeremy Holt. And Jeremy Holt is in the Ivory Coast in West Africa, and he runs Amberwood Trading and has since 1990, working with edible nuts and spices. And lately he's been focused on the cashew industry. And he has developed a software system that helps with cashew manufacturing and the entire supply chain and food safety. And he is an absolute expert in the food safety arena for cashews in particular, and has applied technology to it and has a wonderful story to tell, and that may make you think a little bit more deeply when you pick up a jar or a bag of cashew nuts at the local market. So I'm really excited to have Jeremy on the show today. Well, Jeremy, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
No, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Awesome. Your story is interesting. I'm interested in learning more. You've been running an edible nuts and spices company. You would not consider yourself, you told me, a professional developer of any sort, but even so, you've applied technology to your firm. But give us a little bit of background. You've been doing this for 30 years. What is Amberwood Trading?
Okay, we're basically a edible nut and spices commodity trading company, acting as brokers. We're based here today in Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. We trade particularly in the cashew nut kernels from the new factories that are starting to grow here. And I suppose, if you want, that is my day job. My part-time job is very much sort of along the hobby lines, is programming. I've always been interested in programming, and I suppose I'm the definitive amateur programmer. So I make no claims to any kind of deep knowledge. I follow your podcasts occasionally. I read some of the technical magazines, but I've got to admit I don't understand a tremendous amount of it. So, but the one thing that I'm good at, while I might not be a particularly good coder, I would regard myself as a pretty good systems analyst. And the problem, and I guess not just in this industry, but in many other industries, is that the people for whom you want to write the software have difficulty in expressing to you what it is that they actually want. And the coder at the same time, finds it extremely difficult to understand what his clients needs. Since I'm both the coder and the client, theoretically, I have an advantage over other people. That's the theory. The practice, unfortunately, is, I'm sort of my worst own client in that I write my code, I write my program. I've got a problem now. I've got to sort of change something. I've learned over the years, I spent some considerable money. When I used to live in Brazil, I flew over to Austin, Texas, or a number of years ago I can't remember the name of the course. Oh, you're in Austin, are you? Okay.
I am.
Crumbs, it was something like .NET or something. And anyway, this was a good few years ago, and I sat through 5 days. I didn't. I copped out after about 3 days of learning about unit testing. And I just couldn't get it. I didn't understand it at all. It just went over my head. I was in a room with, 15 or 20 professionals, and I was completely lost. And about 3 years later, I was fiddling around, and it suddenly came to me. I suddenly understood what unit testing is about. So, going back to this whole thing about being, in inverted commas, a systems analyst, I know precisely what the problem is. And then I sit down, and fortunately, I have the ability to write a solution, not the best, but a solution that addresses my particular problem, or the problem that I see in our particular business, in respect of what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So, just give us maybe a little bit of rundown of what the day-to-day operations looks like in edible nuts and spices. What's the general process, and what tends to cause the bottlenecks?
Okay, you've just asked me a very, very broad question. It's like asking me to define software or something. So allow me, if you will, to focus on the area that I'm specifically involved in. Okay, sure. So my particular interest is the cashew business. Without going and giving you the whole history of the global cashew business, the short version is that most of the cashews that you will find in the US or in Europe are processed in Vietnam. The Vietnamese and the Cambodians produce about 30% of the consumption that they require for their processing facilities. The rest they import from Africa. And the Ivory Coast produces about 26% of the global production of raw cashew nuts. Probably very few of your listeners have ever seen a raw cashew nut, or probably even thought where the cashew actually comes from. But it's in India, it's called the devil's nut because it is so difficult to extract the kernel that you consume from the nut in the shell. And so the processing is complicated. The actual machines that you need, there's a lot of manual labor involved in removing what's called the tester. The tester is a layer of skin which adheres to the kernel, which is the bit that you eat, which has to be removed mechanically, and what hasn't been removed mechanically is removed manually. So there's a lot of labor involved. It's, as I say, the actual processing is complex. And what has happened over the last 4 or 5 years is that the West African governments in general have realized that they are entirely dependent on Vietnam and India to take the raw material all the way across the world to process it in Vietnamese and Indian factories and then re-export those kernels to the US, to Europe, and such like. So 5 years ago, the Ivorian government decided that they were going to incentivize the local domestic processing of cashews. Now, the problem is that there are very few people in West Africa. I don't want to sound particularly arrogant, but it's processing is complex. Trading is complex because we're talking about soft commodity markets which don't follow the same rules as hard commodity markets. And there is a general lack of understanding about the technical aspects. And there's another extremely important consideration, which is food safety. With the advent of the Food Safety Modernization Act in the USA, the requirement now is that any food that comes into the USA has to be compliant with this legislation. And, these laws are imposed by the FDA, and they are complex. And it isn't so much rules and regulations. It's what it really addresses is the actual method by which the product is processed inside the factory so that it is safe for a European or an American consumer to eat. And this is one aspect that the factories, even the factories in Vietnam, have been struggling with. Now, up until about a year ago, the legislation, the FDA I wouldn't say they were flexible, but, this is only a law that's come into effect, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years. So, and it's so complicated because it relates to all food in the US. It's been adapted and it keeps changing, and they adapt it again and it changes again. But the most radical change has been that since, I think, about March of last year, all US importers, the directors of the company are now legally responsible for any problems that may arise at some time in the future. Whereas in the past, if you ship goods into the US, you could have them treated if there was a problem, and so on and so forth. So what happened was that here in West Africa, but specifically in the Ivory Coast, this whole thing of food safety hadn't really registered. Factories were popping up left, right, and center. People were spending a lot of money, many millions of dollars building these factories. But food safety was one of these things, well, we'll think about it later. We'll worry about it later on. And what happened was that these factories would go to banks and they would borrow money from banks in order to build their factories. The banks, who have no experience in cashew processing, they know a lot about cocoa. And this is an important point because the Ivory Coast is the biggest producer of cocoa in the world. So all the banks here know about cocoa. But cocoa processing here in Africa is nothing more than recleaning one raw material. They take the muck off and they produce another raw material, the cocoa bean. And it's the cocoa bean that gets exported to the US. And when it arrives, then it's, goes through the whole process and it gets turned into chocolate. Cashews is different. You start off with the raw material and you produce the finished product here in Africa. So what happened was that these banks were lending money to these factories. These factories didn't have the right documentation in respect of food safety, and they suddenly found that they couldn't sell their cashews. And the banks all got very upset because the factories couldn't repay their loans. The banks then stopped lending money, not just to the factories they had previously lent to, but they just said, no, we don't want to get involved in the sector. And the whole thing became paralyzed. Now, in parallel to this, new factories were coming online that did understand the whole thing about food safety. But banks being banks, and I don't want to suggest that African banks are worse than American banks, when they get it into their little heads that, this is good and this is bad, it's difficult to get it out. So what happened was, or what is the situation today, is that, as with any business, you have to understand the nature of the business. You have to understand, what your cash flow is going to be. You have to understand, when you're going to get paid. You have to understand, all kinds of detail. And there is nobody, bar my good self, and I say that in inverted commas, that actually understands, how you take the raw cashew and convert it into a kernel, ship it out to a customer in the US, what your cash flow is, what your product flow is through the factory, what your stock levels have to be, how big you have to build a warehouse. In other words, you have to be able to know how many tons of raw material you need to buy in order to process and how much time it takes to process it so that you can dimension the factory in the first place. So, there's a lot of stuff there. And if you come from, as is the case, if you come from a background in, say, cocoa processing, 100 ton comes in, 99 tons comes out, okay? And the ton that doesn't come out is dirt and rubbish and moisture. With a cashew factory, 100 ton comes in, 24 tons of kernels comes out, okay? Now, that difference is it's the shell, it's the oil, and so on and so forth. So there was this, or is, a massive gap in knowledge about the actual process. So using my so-called coding abilities, basically I sat down and set myself the task of how can I show a bank that this is a viable project, that the factory that's, or the businessman that has come to him and is asking for money knows what he's talking about, that he has thought through his process, that he has stress tested his process. And so I came up with this first program, which is called ANPLAN. I mean, it does what it says on the box. It's not a very interesting program. I very much doubt that any of your listeners would have the remotest interest in looking at it. It's very, very, very specific, and it does one task and it does one task only. And I developed it with the help of a very good friend of mine who actually makes machines for the cashew industry. He's based out of Italy. I don't have a background in finance, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of it's simple finance. It's not complicated. And that's essentially what that program does. And then another program I did very recently, I wrote it much faster, was a simpler program to be able to trade raw cashew nuts. And it's basically a contract processing system. It allows the exporter to record his purchases, record the quality. You see, one of the big problems that we have here is the question of documentation. For every container of raw cashews that gets shipped out, I think you need 17 different bits of paper from 17 different authorities to be stamped and paid for. Some of these things are 20 cents, but every piece of paper has to be put in place. And unless all those bits of paper are in place at the right time, when those documents get presented to the bank, if those documents aren't there, the buyer won't pay for the documents. So, and they're not complicated documents. They're monotonous, dull documents where, you've got to retype. For example, when a container goes over the weighbridge at the terminal of the port, you get a report off the weighbridge with a container number, the seal number, and this data, which is, I don't know, container number is 10 digits or something, a seal number is 9 digits. Someone has to sit down and retype it from one piece of paper to another. And the way things are done here, then he retypes it from another piece to another piece of paper, another piece of paper, another piece of paper. And you can imagine what happens. When you actually come to shipping, the seller will produce a draft bill of lading, which is the bill of lading is the document of title to the goods on board the vessel. He types it up. He sends it to his customer to approve it. The customer approves it. The shipping company then actually issues the original completely differently to the draft. And of course, what you've got is emails flying backwards and forwards. You lose track of, in other words, it's this typical paper office. And all this program does is basically, in its simplest version, all it does is it gives you one source of truth. And you only have to type things in once. And, there's a lot of security involved because the buyer has to send an inspector in to check the goods. The warehouseman has to ensure that the goods that came in are the same goods that are leaving. So there's a lot of that involved. And so that's what the second
digitized the process.
Digitize the process and hopefully make it easier. But, unfortunately, when I actually sit down and try and describe to myself the process, because I know the process intuitively, as does everyone who does it. But when you actually try and even just write it out in pseudocodes, my goodness, it's a lot more complicated than I thought it was.
There's too many branches, aren't there?
Yeah. Yes, and there's so many what ifs, and I try and keep things as simple as possible because, first of all, these programs have to work in French, and my French isn't wonderful, and however wonderful Google is, it's when you're trying to translate, 2 words, Google isn't the best thing, which I understand, because it needs context. So there's a lot of
Right.
additional complications. So I hope I've answered your question, Jeffrey.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
Hey, this is Jeffrey. Do you ever wonder if your software project is on the right path? It's really common for software projects to experience delays, to have the quality not where it needs to be, or have the team spending more time maintaining the software than you really should. In my practice, we know the challenges implementing all parts of DevOps, and it can make your head spin how many things you have to think about, and somewhere in your gut, you know that something's missing. So I've created a comprehensive 30-point DevOps inspection, reviewing your current process, methods, tools, source control, build integration, the various levels of testing, provisioning and maintaining environments, deploying, logging, telemetry, everything you need to think about in a high throughput, high productivity DevOps environment. And it really helps you gain peace of mind knowing that you're on the right track. And we are offering some more of our really popular 30-point DevOps inspections, and it's normally a $5,000 value, but I'm giving it away for free for my podcast listeners. Just send me an email, jeffrey@clear-measure.com. That's Jeffrey. And I'd be happy to inspect your existing DevOps environment, whether you use Azure DevOps Services, Octopus Deploy, TeamCity, any number of tools, because there are a lot out there. But what's important is that you have a complete and automated DevOps environment put together the right way. So get a second pair of eyes. Send me an email. Absolutely. It's in Texas. In Texas, peanut farming is big. Texas and Georgia produce all the peanuts, at least to my knowledge, for the country, and so I've done some work in some software that is digitized to part of the peanut process, which is in Central Texas, and the inspection part is huge, just to classify which peanuts are good for peanut M&Ms and which peanuts are good for marketplace peanut butter.
I used to trade a lot of peanuts out of the South. We used to do a lot of business out of Alabama and Georgia. Well,
those types of software systems are really interesting because on the one hand, you have, in the fancy world, is IoT, Internet. You have correlation with machines that have to do something, and then on the other hand, you have workflow to map out the process of how to flow things through and identify bottlenecks. You have a data warehouse to give analytics so that you have reports for the people who are examining, hey, what's going well, what's not going well. Exactly. I mean, it just touches so many things.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking at the moment to an extremely interesting company that had developed a system of blockchain for food safety. And the idea there is to hopefully incorporate that with the machines that are in the factories today. Most of the machines are wired up with PCC systems, so that's the electronic feed into the recording system. Now, what is so interesting about this particular part of the blockchain, or the traceability chain, is that it is geared up for food safety. So you can take your critical control points and record each and every aspect of your cleaning procedures, your swabbing, and so on and so forth. And again, the idea is to piggyback that onto the existing traceability system that the Ivorian government has, which exists between the farmer and the factory, or the farmer and the warehouse in Abidjan. Now, the other end is once the kernels have been produced, once you've got a box of 50 pounds of beautiful cashew kernels, that you can then plug yourself into someone else's part of the supply chain. For example, the shipping company or the transport company to the port to the shipping company. And of course, all of that already exists. Now, I'll be honest, I tried to get in touch with IBM many, many, many times to inquire about food trust. Maybe it's because I'm sitting in Africa, I don't know. Maybe it's because I don't speak geek speak that they completely ignored me. But, there are 1,000 reasons why we should have a full traceability system, as much because the basic tenet of food safety, even specifically with respect to the Food Safety Modernization Act, is that there is traceability. So, traceability.
That's right, because something is going to slip through, and we need to know where it came from.
Exactly. So, the pioneers in this, in fact, were Walmart and IBM together creating the Food Trust blockchain system. And, if you go onto YouTube, you'll see many, many videos of Frank Yanis, who used to be the head of quality, I think, at Walmart. Now he's an FDA director. Explaining why Walmart was so committed to introducing this blockchain and or this traceability on food safety. But there's two aspects to food safety, or to traceability rather. One is the food safety aspect, which is that you as a consumer, when you go into Kroger's or something, that if you go home and there is a problem with the cashews or the romaine lettuce or the peanut butter or whatever it is that you consumed, that you can go back to the store and hopefully wave the packet at the store manager, and he will say, "Hold on a second, Jeffrey, give me 2 minutes and I'll tell you exactly where the stuff came from and I'll put it right." But there's another aspect to it, which is the marketing aspect, which is, and I haven't been to the States for a long time, but certainly in the UK when I was last there, you can go into a coffee shop and you can point your phone at your cup of coffee, and it will, and up on your phone will appear a picture of a smiling Colombian lady who's just picked those coffee beans for you. And that's a massive marketing thing. And I don't want to sound cynical, anything but it's a combination of the advanced marketing that this gives you on traceability together with the whole food safety aspect. So again, I certainly don't want to get into a conversation about the coronavirus and all of that, but I'll tell you one thing, and of that I'm absolutely certain, that the virus is originally, it's related to food safety. Okay, that's where it comes from. Okay, today we have very rigorous controls in the US, thanks to FSMA, thanks to the FDA's activities. We have very rigorous controls in Europe as well. Australia, Japan, and so on and so forth. However, there isn't an enormous amount of consistency between these various countries. And I think that, given the technology that's available today and the limits on the technology today, and I say that in inverted commas, things might still yet slip through. We know things slip through the net. I mean, you only have to open a newspaper to see the latest salmonella scare in the US, and the millions of dollars in lawsuits and such like. But I think what is going to happen once this virus is over is, I think, the major developed world's health organizations. So, I mean, the legal entities. So, I mean, the FDA, the food health authorities in the UK and such like. I think they're going to demand even more of the importers that are bringing the product in. At the moment, the traceability is, again, I don't know about the US, but in the UK, for example, up until very, very recently, if you bought a packet of cashews or a packet of raisins or a packet of peanuts, on the packet, it would say produce of more than one country. Now it's starting to say produce of India or produce of the United States.
More specific.
Okay, and it's going to get more and more detailed. It will probably end up, where produce of Amberwood Trading, I have a factory, but Amberwood Trading's factory in Segela, the Ivory Coast, produced on the 17th of March 2020, and it was handled by Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C. And in truth, that technology is there. The problem is that I say it's there. I mean, it's close, but we've got so many competing systems for traceability, and so many different degrees of what constitutes traceability, that we need some form of standardization. And I'm a firm believer that we're going to see a global form of standardization. And, it'll be good for the consumer, it'll be good for the retailer, it'll be good for the entire supply chain. Because what happens is that ultimately this comes down to the level of the farmer. Okay? And the farmer is always the poor bugger who is screwed over left, right, and center when, and imagine maybe not an American farmer, but a poor farmer in the middle of Africa. He doesn't understand what's going on in the big bad world out there. All he knows is that the price has dropped because the coronavirus for whatever, and he has no money to buy seed for his next crop. He has no money to pay his workers. He can't buy food for his own family, and it's a tragedy. And I don't want to get too much involved in that aspect of it, but when someone is losing money, they lose interest, or it isn't that they're losing money, but they can't even survive. They lose interest. All they want to do is, and cashews grow on trees, okay, literally grow on trees. So it comes off the tree, okay. They don't pick it, they wait for it to fall. They pick it off the ground, they remove the apple, which, again, cashews are interesting because it's the only fruit in the world where the seed grows outside of the body. So go onto Google and have a look at a cashew apple. So the farmer simply pulls the apple off the seed, which is the nut, the nut in the shell, and he sends it off to the factory, or he sends it to someone who's going to, to a middleman, to another middleman, and so on and so forth, until it ends up in a factory in Vietnam. And there's no motivation for him to improve the quality. There's no motivation for him to improve his yields. So by being able to add value at the downstream points, okay? So if you as a consumer, you can walk into your local Walmart, Kroger, okay, and you can buy a packet of cashews, and you know that it was Mr. Seiko in Segela in Côte d'Ivoire that actually picked those cashews for you. There is it creates an emotional link, okay? And you will pay a higher price because, you're a middle-class consumer. I don't know you at all, obviously, but you understand what I'm getting at. You'd like to do your little bit for whatever it is that you can do. You can't come to Africa and help change things. But if you can help as a consumer, paying a little bit more, that extra bit will ultimately filter down to the farmer. And on top of all of that, the moment the food safety regulations come into effect, the factory is obliged to ensure that the part of the supply chain, which is the farmer to the factory, is safe. Okay, and in order to do that, he has to help the farmer, be able to be part of that part of the supply chain. So that involves maybe providing an agronomist, maybe providing better fertilizers, teaching the farmer how to improve his yields, how to add value to his product, and so it becomes a virtuous circle. And at the end of the day, if you're going to have to pay an extra 2 or 3 cents on a packet of cashews, it's not the end of the world. And more to the point, you can either conceive this as I'm paying this premium because I know the product is safe and I'm not going to become sick when I eat it. And then you get the added bonus. I'm buying these cashews because it's helping Mr. Seiko in Segela and Côte d'Ivoire. It's there's 2 benefits to it. And that's what the program, so what I have to do, or what I feel I have to do, is be able to provide a way for foreign investors, local banks, venture capitalists, what have you, to be able to look at the cashew sector in Cote d'Ivoire, in the Ivory Coast, and understand, okay, this is a bad project, this is a good project. This is a project where I will get my money back, plus interest, plus profits. Okay, because no one gets involved unless there's money in it. So I brought, I don't know, 40 years of trading experience in cashews to the problem. The AMPLAN system addresses only part of the problem, which is, the money side. I can, the program will show you that you make money out of it or you don't make money. And then I leave it up to far, far cleverer people than I, to do the blockchain part, incorporate it into other parts of the supply chain. And that's it. So
awesome. Well, that's fascinating. That's some pretty far-reaching software. What types of things are you looking forward to next in the future over this next year? Are there any technological advancements or any parts of the process that you have your eye on?
You mean from a purely technology point of view?
Yeah, anything.
Well, I would love the Ivory Coast to improve their internet access to start with. I'll rephrase that. It's not the Ivory Coast, it's the bloody Orange, the French telecommunications company, who are just beyond belief. I would like to have electricity here for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, my requirements are fairly basic living in Cote d'Ivoire. In terms of technology, no, I broke my laptop the other day. Okay, it fell off the desk and smashed, and I can't buy a new one. And you know why I can't buy a new one? Because you can only buy an Azure keyboard in Cote d'Ivoire, the French keyboard. And I can't type on a French keyboard. I can only type on a US or English keyboard. So, it's crazy. I managed to break my iPad the other day. And I went into a shop that's an official iPad distributor. And they said, yeah, no problem at all. We can get it fixed. We'll send it to Apple in California, and you can have it back in 6 months. Thank you.
What? Oh, gosh.
So as I say, my technological demands are very, very limited. Give me internet and I'm more than happy.
Right. That's a good point, because as much as Microsoft and other technology platform providers will tout what's coming next and the new advances, if we were to back up in time 10, 20 years and think, okay, could we build this system, or could we do what we want to do with technology of 10 years ago, 20 years ago? And the answer so many times is yes. We don't need the latest thing that just came out to make this possible. Exactly.
I put everything onto Azure. I don't understand Azure. I just go and press the wizard buttons, and it does what's. And then I go into shock when I get the bill at the end of the month, because I'm sure I've set it up incorrectly. I use two phenomenal programs for the back. I use RavenDB for the back end, and I use for the front end Aurelia. I use them because I've learned how to use them, and I have, every time I sort of switch on the computer, there's 1,000 different new JavaScript frameworks, and I sort of look at it and think, well, should I be learning Vue or React or what's the other one, the Google one?
Angular,
which that's what I started with. Every time they changed it, oh God.
Right.
But,
and they don't give you the benefit of giving it a new name when they change it dramatically. They call it the same name.
Exactly.
And then you realize, wait a minute, this isn't the same thing.
Exactly. So, Aurelia is, for what I need it for, is brilliant. And the same goes with Raven. It's because I don't have to do anything really complicated, really sophisticated. And the reason I absolutely love using these two programs, and will only use them, and I'm not interested in getting hip and looking at other things, is I hate Stack Overflow. okay, with a passion. I won't go anywhere near it. If I ask I don't ask dumb questions because I sit down and I think out the question. But then someone tells me that I'm asking a dumb question, and honestly, I don't need that. But if I go onto the Aurelia discourse channel, I get an answer within 2 minutes from one of the developers, and they are brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Nice.
I don't think there are many people on that on the Aurelia discourse, but the attention you get, you feel it's like you are getting a personal service, and it is amazing. And if it wasn't for the help that I was getting from them, then I certainly wouldn't have been able to write the front end. And I'd say exactly the same thing about RavenDB. I've been using it since it first came out. Boy, oh boy, was it complicated to start with, but now I understand it. It does everything that I need, and obviously a lot more. And the same thing there. If I go onto their Google Groups, you'll almost invariably get an answer from Oren. And Oren Aini, the guy's amazing. He must be so busy, but he actually did a code review for me. And I was so embarrassed, sending him my crap code and asking him to look at it. And it took me a year to write Amplan. It took him 15 minutes to come back with his comments. And of course, every comment was valid. And, where do you get this kind of attention? Do you think if I were to, I don't know. I mean, I'm a tremendous fan of these two systems. Someone at I think one of the salespeople at Hibernating Rhinos asked me, why do I use Raven? And I think he was expecting me to say, oh, well, the indexing is better than Mongo or, this, that, and the other. And I said, because I'm brain dead and I just don't have to think about it. All I do is I write my code out in C# and press a button, and lo and behold, I've got a working database and I don't have to think about it. I hope I'm not offending anyone at Raven when I say that, but it's the fact that it is so simple. Once you get over the initial hurdle and you get over the concepts, it's such a simple system to use. And, I tried Firebase once, and bloody hell, is that complicated. Why is it so complicated? But anyway, it's... well,
hey, they've got a good niche, and if you're writing in C#, here you have data. Okay, we'll store your data.
Yeah,
that's pretty much how I don't know, but we'll store it.
Yeah, I used Firebase once, and because it was really, the application was really, really simple. And I found out, I had to sort of write my own API on top of their API, just to sort of, some time ago now, but, just to do the most basic things. Whereas, with Raven, it's just basically at the end of every block of code, you just write whatever it is, session store, and Bob's your uncle. You've got yourself a working database. Couldn't ask for more.
Right.
And,
absolutely.
I think I've got over the point. I'm not a programmer. That's not my primary job. And I need something that I don't have to think about. Which is probably why, if you look at my programs, you'll see why they're so crappy.
But they do tremendously important things.
Well, I'd like to think
key.
so, but yeah.
So as we close here, if someone is going to their market and they pick up their packet of cashews, what should they be looking for to follow that traceability back to the source?
Hopefully a barcode.
Okay.
And they should probably ask the store where they bought it how far that barcode takes them back. I don't think it's there yet. There are some factories. I think there's a factory in Benin that is able to trace back. I think they've got some relationship with one of the big retailers in the US. I think they can trace back. From a personal point of view, I would love the consumer to pick up his packet of cashews and see that it was produced in the Ivory Coast. Certainly the quality of the cashews from here is phenomenal. They are really, really beautiful quality cashews. And, I suppose, really, I think the demand is already there from the US consumer, from the European consumer for traceability. It's certainly there from the retailer side. I suspect a lot of the consumers don't realize how much work is involved for Walmart to put a packet of cashews or peanuts on the shelf, and what is involved in that supply chain to get it so that you can take it home. And you wouldn't expect the consumer to understand it. The retailers today, like it or not, and I think they do like it, are totally committed to food safety. And they have no choice in the matter. I mean, they don't want to get sued and they don't want to kill their customers. So, it's a win-win for...
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what it comes down to. Salmonella is lethal.
Absolutely.
Right. And, you've had cases, over the last week, I think at Christmas, you had a big case with romaine lettuce from California. So, yeah. So it's not just the third world that has food safety problems. I mean, you have it on your doorstep. The consumer is more demanding. I don't think the consumer realizes how much work the retailer does today and how much he demands of the end of the supply chain. And, and it's a wonderful thing that these demands are coming up the supply chain. Now, obviously, it's not a perfect flow and we're still in the early days of it, but with the urgency that we have today, because like I said, when the coronavirus is finally over, and it will end, people are going to sit back and think, well, what did we do wrong? How could we do things better? And food safety will be at the very top of all of this, without any shadow of a doubt. And whether third world countries such as the Ivory Coast or Ghana or Nigeria or Mozambique or Tanzania, who are all processing cashews today, the speed at which they will react to this pressure will determine the success or failure of their industries. And there's a tremendous will here in the Ivory Coast. I know Ghana a little bit. I used to run a big cashew factory there, and they were totally committed to food safety. I can't comment about the other countries because I don't really know them. And here, there are many factories that are 100% committed, and some are already fully certified. Some are very close to being certified. The brand new factories that are being built are being built from the ground up with food safety already in mind. And it's expensive, let's not be under any illusion. It's extremely expensive to be able to meet today's FDA criteria for food. But I'm very hopeful. People accuse me of being overly optimistic, but no. I mean, as I said at the very, very, very start of this conversation, the Ivorians have realized they can no longer depend, and it's no longer desirable to sell their raw cashews to Vietnam to have them processed. So that's where it starts from. It's from purely economic and commercial reasons that this whole thing starts. And it will be economic and commercial reasons that will be the driver here in Côte d'Ivoire to make sure that everything is 100% food safe. I was going to say kosher.
Yeah.
That's an English expression, isn't it?
Well, yeah. And I think it's a very specific prepreration
yes, exactly.
method as well.
So, I think you know what I meant.
Well, thank you so much. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming on the show. This is fascinating. I learned a tremendous amount that I didn't know, and I'm sure the viewers did as well. And it's great to hear how technology is being applied to make a difference in this industry as well. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you, Jeffrey. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.